Great. Okay. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. On behalf of Dr. Youssef and PHRI, I'm delighted to introduce our visiting speaker for today's special PHRI rounds, Professor David Moher. His talk today is one of several as part of the 2021 Hooker Distinguished Visiting Professor Lectures at McMaster. Dr. Moher is a professor in the School of Epidemiology and Public Health, the University of Ottawa, and he's a senior scientist in clinical epidemiology program within the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute, where he directs the Center for Journalology. So there is an ology for journals as well. And Professor Moher received his PhD in clinical epidemiology and biostatistics from Amsterdam Medical Center at the University of Amsterdam. And his current research foci is on open scholarship, trustworthiness in research. Now he has over 700 publications and is among the most highly cited scientists in the world. And he's also a fellow with the Royal Society of Canada and the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences. So in his lecture today, he will present on dealing with predatory journals, how to identify, how to avoid, and how to support research integrity. A highly complex topic for sure, but certainly one that strikes a chord with many people. So with that, I'm happy to hand it off to Dr. Moher for his presentation.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the introduction, Andrew, and thank you also to McMaster University for inviting me to be the Hooker Professor. It's been a busy few days, but really great to have some questions and opportunities to have a nice Q&A with lots of people. So I've really enjoyed that. And this morning is a continuation of the saga of predatory journals. And my disclosures are, for good or for bad, quite a lot of the research that I'm going to talk about this morning is from our group. And I have, relative to that, quite a lot of experience sort of at journals and how journals operate. But just to end by saying I am very dyslexic, so apologies for any spelling errors or miscommunication. If there's something unclear, just come back and ask me and I'll try to answer as best as I can. So the learning objectives for today are really to be able to define sort of what predatory journals are, to identify the drivers of the current academic incentives and reward structure, and finally to know, really know how to avoid submission to predatory journals. Now, here is a very eager looking fox, and this is based on quite recent work that we've done, coming to a international global consensus as to what a predatory journal is. And here I want to give thanks to people from all over the world who came together to work at this consensus meeting, which was the end product of a lot of work. And we defined predatory journals as entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship and are characterized by false and misleading information, deviation from best editorial and publication practices, and a lack of transparency and or use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. Now, I want to unpack this just a little bit because we don't have too much time today to really go into a lot of detail. But I would encourage you to read the paper if you want to unpack it more. So I will just mention sort of false and misleading information. And that really would start with the impact factors. Predatory journals are very innovative, and I do at one level have to commend them for their innovation of coming up with a whole load of false impact factors. and they have fantastic names like the global impact factor and such, and they're all fake. They're all absolutely fake. And I'll just then go to the last one of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation and sort of give you an example from this year, 2021, in dentistry. Here's a very nice piece of a researcher who took 1 year of invitations from Predatory Journal, and she received 3,000 invitations over the course of a calendar year. So that's quite a lot to deal with, actually, even simply clicking delete to those. Now, what did we leave out, which is perhaps somewhat controversial? We left out peer review, journal quality, and intent to deceive. And I'll just spend a moment on peer review, because some people might think, oh, peer review is sort of a bastion of journals. But the evidence is that legitimate journals are not always so good at peer review. And it really is not a marker for distinguishing between predatory journals and real journals. And that's unfortunate, but there are probably very many reasons why peer review doesn't work in a legitimate journal, starting with the vast majority of people who do peer review are not trained, and so there are numerous problems, and most editors are not trained to do their job of being editors as well. I put up retracted papers from the coronavirus because thus far we know that several of the retracted papers are coming from less than sort of authentic journals. One I even think is from a Canadian journal where they proposed a mathematical equation to get rid of COVID-19. And that managed to pass peer review. It managed to pass editorial approval and was subsequently retracted. Now, if Gina Collada, who is one of the science reporters for the New York Times, if she's sort of writing about predatory publications, then you know there's got to be a problem. And this is obviously from a few years ago, but nonetheless, it made the New York Times. Eduardo Franco from McGill University in University Affairs went to have a look and see how many people at McGill universities are doing the work of predatory journals. And what he found is over 200 faculty members at McGill were involved in some aspect of predatory journals. I took a little look at McMaster and noted that I believe one can double check this and it probably changes day to day, but there were 31 faculty members had some sort of editorial role at OMICS, and OMICS is a very large predatory journal, and you could dig deeper there. But I just wanted to point out that being involved in predatory journals is really a global problem, and we know this happens at our university as well, and at many other universities. So I'm not really trying to single out McMaster. I'm just simply trying to point out that that nobody really is exempt from getting involved. It's perhaps that they're involved and they don't know. I will give you one example of at the University of Ottawa, a faculty member in epidemiology is an editor-in-chief of a OMICS journal. Now, I do want to give credit to predatory journals in that Jeffrey Beall sort of blew the whistle in 2012 and noted the existence of predatory journals. And he came up with two lists, a list of publishers that may have multiple journals and a second list of single entity journals. And he decided a list of criteria that he used to nominate or ordain people as predatory journals. The problem is that his methodology was perhaps not robust, and he made this decision himself. He didn't use, as typical, for example, in a systematic review where we may have a second person screen records. He didn't do any of that. He made the decisions all himself. And some of his work, some of his published work suggests that he had a rather low view or inappropriate view of research coming from the South, and he wasn't able to distinguish predatory journals from startup journals, and that is obviously a problem. But I do want to give him credit. He certainly was the first person a number of years ago to let us know about predatory journals. In 2017, we were able to examine about 1,900 articles published in predatory journals, and we wanted to have a look and see sort of what was being published in predatory journals. And I think the only reason that this was published in Nature is based on the yellow highlight. The myth was that, or the myth is still, that most of these journals are being published in Asia, Southeast Asia, the South. And what we uncovered is that actually 57% of these articles were being published from, first world, in quotes. And prestigious institutions were included. And this included, places like Harvard, Mayo Clinic, University of Texas, and the list could go on. And what was very interesting too is that of the articles that reported being funded, the NIH was the most prevalent funder. And I'm going to come back to this. Just to also say that Canada is certainly not immune for this. And CIHR has also funded several research studies that have ended up in predatory journals. And I hope that this research is sort of moving people away from the myth. And I think also, if you looked at randomized trials, and you see that we included, these studies included, literally millions of people. And that's really unfortunate, because we know that, for example, randomized trials typically do not include enough people. And we see, though, that there are millions of people being included in randomized trials published in predatory journals. And what motivates people to publish in predatory journals? We've tried to look at this. Obviously a disappointing response rate, but the people who we did hear from indicated that actually they are responding to these sort of indiscriminate email invitations. And we also found out from the responses to the survey that people indicated that they had received peer review, and they found that peer review to be substantive and helpful. Now, I think we need to be cautious with that. In our surveys, what we did is we asked the respondents whether they would share any of the peer reviews with us, and we've never received a peer review. So it's unclear to us. This is an area that needs further exploration. It's unclear to us whether people were perhaps not telling us the truth, whether they were confused, but we were not able to receive any of the peer reviews of people who said they received peer review. So what is driving publications to predatory journals? Well, I think it's very clearly established that the publisher parish mandate of universities is alive and very well. And if you want to progress in your career, you need to publish and publish as much as you can. There's lots of evidence for that. I think the other driver is open access publication model, whereby I'm just give an example in BMJ now. If you want to publish in BMJ, it's the APC, the author processing charge, is $5,000. It's certainly not uncommon to have an author processing charge of $2,000 or $3,000. And so this is obviously a lot of money for anybody. And the predatory publishing model has come in at about 1/10 of the cost, so that you could perhaps publish in a predatory journal for probably $200 or $300. And for people in countries where there is fiscal resource limitations, or people in so-called first world countries who don't have a lot of money to publish, this is at face value a very, very attractive option. So the publisher parish model, as I indicated, it's the current standard in across, on average, all universities. And the university ranking schemes are based to a degree on productivity, and productivity is usually counted by publications and to a degree grants as well. And there are, of course, an increasing number of students who are doing their, for example, their PhD by publication. So they've got to get their thesis, in a sense, their articles published prior to being able to defend their PhD. I've mentioned the open access model is obviously a massive competitor for predatory journals. Subscription-based journals are not a competitor for predatory journals. And I want to talk a little bit about this young gentleman who is the CEO and publisher of OMICS, which is by far the largest predatory publisher. They publish several hundred predatory journals in health, and they also coordinate probably 2,000 to 3,000 conferences per year. So predatory publishing is not just about articles, but it's about paying fees to attend conferences that simply don't exist. Is predatory publishing sort of a big issue? And Shen and Bjork indicated that it's about 500,000, 450,000 articles per year. So it's not insignificant. And there is no indication at the moment that that number is decreasing. And what we showed, I think this was from from 2020, we actually took a little look to see how predatory journals are sort of leaking into trusted sources such as PubMed and PubMed Central. And they can get in there through a variety of ways, but most dominantly if the research is funded. And so we looked at the NIH to see what institutes were funding predatory articles. And what we see here is the National Cancer Institute is the big winner here. And they're funding an awful lot of research that ends up in predatory journals, although accessible through PubMed Central. Jill Hayden from Halifax recently published this year a very nice paper indicating that in one case that Predatory Journals had penetrated a Cochrane review. Now, that's, of course, probably not the only case in which we see Predatory Journals penetrating systematic reviews. I want to share with you a few slides, but really give credit to Manoj Laloo. Manoj Laloo is an anesthesiologist who runs a basic science lab and is also a member of the Center for Journalology. And he's taken quite a close look at predatory publications in anesthesia journals. And here is his sort of flow diagram. And the box to concentrate in is that he's identified 1,265 randomized controlled trials that have appeared in predatory publications of anesthesia content. And another myth is that you know, predatory papers are not cited. And so what Manoj's team did is they looked through Google Scholar, Web of Science, Dimensions, and Microsoft Academic. And what they found is that although the mode is 0, it's quite clear that these papers are being cited. Even if you look at the Web of Science, you see that there's 30 citations, Dimensions 45. So you can obviously read this yourself. So I think it's really incorrect to say that actually these papers are not being cited. And the other very important piece that he looked at was the majority of these studies reported a DOI, which is a digital object identifier. It's a unique identifier that's tagged on to a report, and found that actually, you know, 1 in 5, 1 in 4, these DOIs were fake. And I think that this may be the first time that we've sort of shown that the DOIs that are out there, you can't always believe DOIs. And that, I think, is a real problem. So we have a problem of these papers are being cited and they're having fake DOIs. Now, he also identified 25 Cochrane reviews which had cited 29 of these randomized trials from his sample. And indeed, the troubling piece for me would be that actually 13 of those trials were included in the meta-analysis. And that's quite troubling, because one could imagine that they may have an influence on the point estimate and the confidence boundaries around that effectiveness of the intervention under question. Now, moving along, I think, you know, we recognize that there is a problem of predatory journals, and what I would say is how can stakeholders respond to the rise of predatory journals? And we've published this piece in Nature Human Behavior that we hope will be of some use to people. And I'm just focusing here on researchers and academic institutions and academic libraries in terms of what they could do. And I think a lot of it really sort of depends on putting mandates and policy in place at academic institutions. One thing to get people to really know about is something called Think, Check, and Submit. And it's, in a sense, a checklist that people could use to see whether you should be submitting to the journal in question. And I provided the URL below there. There are also tools for selecting journals, and I've mentioned several of them here. you can actually simply go on there and see what journals these tools may suggest. So often you can simply drop in your abstract and it will come up with a list of potential journals for you to think about submitting to. I think this is a really good, this is a group of librarians from Liège, the University of Liège in Belgium, and they've developed something called the Compass tool. It's really, in a sense, an authenticator tool. And I would encourage people to simply go and have a look at this. Here is the sort of, I just put in an example of, is PLOS Medicine on an authentic journal, and you can sort of see that it goes from green to red. On the Compass website, it puts in a very nice piece on the methodology that they use, the algorithms that they use, and our center is working with this team to try to further advance the tool. So I think it's a useful tool, and I think more people ought to think about using it. I think researchers ought to be asking themselves, have I cited work in the journal? What do my colleagues think of the journal, particularly senior colleagues? And does the journal have consistent content? Often we see with predatory journals, their content is inconsistent. So we know, for example, the New England Journal of Medicine publishes every week. I can assure you that predatory journals don't publish necessarily every week whatsoever. Similarly, what do my colleagues think about the conference that I'm thinking of cashing out $1,500 to attend? How many years has the conference been held? How I attended this conference previously? So there are a number of questions that one should ask and not simply act alone. And I think that's particularly true for early career researchers. I think what research institutions really need to think about is issues of reputational risk to the institution and potentially reputational risk to the individual. What I didn't get into is that when I showed you the initial paper that we were very fortunate to have published in Nature, what Nature asked me to do was to send a letter to the corresponding author of every article included in our sample to tell them that this was about to be published in Nature. Now, that seemed quite reasonable to me, I suppose, at one level, but it turned out to be a very sort of stressful period. What happened is that typically these corresponding authors sent this note, my correspondence, to their vice president, senior vice president of research. And these people completely bypassed me and went straight to the editor of Nature and sort of said, I'm a quack. I don't know what I'm doing. The methodology is all wrong, et cetera, and that they had not published in a predatory journal. And luckily for us, it was Nature, very experienced editors, and stood by us because they had seen our data. And I think I'm sharing this with you because it's an example of reputational risk. I think many institutions want to avoid that. So I think really and truly, what could you do as an institution? One is to provide mandatory training to graduate students, researchers, information specialists, librarians on best publication practices, how to select journals, develop and enforce policies on expected standards of publishing. So I think that there's actions and that there's benefits of these actions And obviously all of this is moving towards trying to maintain institutional credibility and researcher responsibility. Now here is our institute developed a policy, and I'm happy to share that with you if you're going to think about introducing a policy. Obviously, you don't have to use it. You could cut and paste and make it better for your own personal needs. But I think policy is one way of instituting change. And I think mandatory training is really, really important. I also wanted to share with you Larissa's recently successfully finished her PhD, woohoo, on predatory publications. And here she looked at funders. What sort of funders give guidance on actually where their fundees, their grantees, where they should try to publish. And what Larissa found is that few funders provide any guidance, and yet they probably have a I don't know if they have a duty, but they're spending a lot of money, so they, in a sense, they should really go and try very hard to see ensure that the grantees are able to publish in a legitimate source. Our center, and I've given you the URL below, is we have a number of resources that may or may not be useful to people. We have a section on predatory journals. Sorry, was that me or? I'll just continue. We have a section on predatory journals. We include infographics and a lot of other information that can help people sort of avoid predatory journals. For example, here is the section on our resources on predatory journals. What is a predatory journal? And here's an example of one-page infographics for frequently asked questions for clinicians and researchers. Then what we often see, I think I've submitted to a predatory journal, what do I do now? So we try to answer lots of questions, and all of this, of course, is open access. If it's of any use to you as researchers here today or institutionally, please feel free to come and take it and use it. We also did a systematic review looking to see whether there were actually checklists out there. And it seemed to us that there is a very large number of checklists and also YouTube activities to help people. But I think what the bottom line is that what's happened is that there are so many checklists out there that it's simply too confusing for the vast majority of people. And I suspect what they'll do is, in a sense, throw up their hands. Now, we have a checklist. I suppose we're one of those many people have developed the checklist, but again, this is available on our resources page, and it's also available to put in people's lab coats. And again, if it's of any use to you, feel free to come take it and use it. We do recommend that people do not spend more time and energy developing checklists, because there are a very large number of them out there. We also, on our resource page, have policy documents on predatory journals. So for example, the first one, there's a discussion document by the COPE, which is the Committee on Publication Ethics. And we also have the City University of New York has a statement on predatory journals. Again, you could go and to our resources, you could take that and look at it and use it and do whatever you want with it. We're completely open science, open access. So there's some policy documents that you think about using, and policy documents may be also able to help train people. I wanted to share with you somewhat similar to what's going on in Belgium, that we have received some funding to develop a journal authenticator tool. And sort of different than the Belgian group is what we want to be able to do is not simply say whether it's predatory or not, because I think that's almost irrelevant today. What we want to be able to do is to really provide a list of information about certain criteria of a journal. So for example, does the journal have open peer review? Is the journal a member of the DOAJ? Can we easily identify the editor? And we simply want to put them up for each. You put in the name of the journal, and a lot of sort of, we hope, will be useful information, including some evidence-based information to help authors make decisions about the authenticity of a journal. We're not focused solely on predatory journals. And I think that's where I end today. This is, for those who don't know, this is Chihuli, I guess. He does a lot of classwork. Okay, thank you very much. And I hope that was of some use.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Moher, for that really superb and informative talk. Normally, when we think of predatory journals, it's when we receive an email from them. We often get, I know myself, I get like maybe 4 or 5 a day. And we treat it much the same way like a call from the air duct cleaners. You know, we hang up, or in this case, we put it in our spam box, right? So your talk is going to get us thinking about underlying issues with training and policy and get us to think much more about it. So thank you so much for sharing that. So we have lots of time for questions and Q&A and discussion.
So can I ask a question?
Yes.
Andrew?
Yes.
First, thank you for a very nice and comprehensive presentation. And it's kind of interesting to watch this, you know, right in the aftermath of the presidency in the United States that just ended in January, where truth really depended on who was on people's subjective definition of truth, and this sort of approach to predatory journals is just sort of to me a scientific extension of this idea of we can decide what truth is and what objectivity is, and we're just going to get out there and compete for the share of voice of people and flood it, like with the OMICS one that you mentioned, and kind of overwhelm the system. And you know, it's like watching Fox News versus CNN or something of that nature. I think the only way to deal with this is what you said at the end. I don't think that one rule or 2 rules is going to work, because you know, one of your first criteria, for instance, in a checklist, well, if a journal charges low fees, then it could be a predatory journal. Well, New England Journal of Medicine doesn't charge high fees to publish an article in NEJM, and nobody would call that a predatory journal. So I don't think simple criteria. I think it's really just like we've trained people for the last 30 years, our residents and fellows and researchers, about proper critical appraisal and how to assess a scientific article, regardless of what journal it's in. I think that those are the types of skills and education and sensitization by the type of research and the stuff that you're publishing that can sensitize researchers and students and fellows and everybody in the scientific realm to, you know, identifying the red flags and just shunning those sources. But we can't, I can't think of a way that we can legislate things away, just like you can't legislate, you know, bad newspapers out there, and you can't legislate, you know, bad television networks. So I'm just curious to hear your response to that.
Thank you. Well, I'll just say probably 2 or 3 things. One is I think the New England Journal of Medicine is really not a good journal to use, because it's not a competitor of an open access journal. Predatory journals, the competitor is open access. The New England Journal is subscription based, And you know, if you have a subscription, you can read the content. If you don't have a subscription, you
Sure. Yeah.
cannot. So that's probably the first thing. The second thing is that I think I want to make a very important distinction between a predatory journal and the content of an article. My point is that many legitimate randomized controlled trials end up in predatory journals, funded by the NIH, funded by CIHR. So that is the issue. The issue is that, you know, as for example, does McMaster University want to have a grantee who's funded by CIHR want their research end up in a predatory publication? No. It's a reputational risk to the institution. It might well be a reputational risk to the individual. So a number of things need to happen. One is they could advocate some policy. Two, they could advocate some training. And three is they could randomly, I mean, this is obviously, if you think about it from an integrated knowledge translation perspective, you obviously want the involvement of your faculty, but you could randomly select some CVs to ensure that there are no predatory publications there. We know this because within our own institution and work that we've been commissioned to do elsewhere, that predatory publications are included in people's CV. In Italy, which has a central process for promotion and tenure, enabling some more closer investigation, they have identified that 5 to 10% of people's CVs contain predatory publication. These are CVs of people who are going for promotion and tenure. So I think it's not the fact that should you watch Fox News or should you watch CNN. I think what you need to do is train and educate people about, if you watch Fox News, here is the perspective you're going to get, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how I think you would have success.
Just a follow-up comment. I agree with you. And you know, these days, just like undergraduates' essays are passed through software to see if they're plagiarizing, it'd be very simple with everything being computerized, it'd be very simple for the CIHR CV module or with universities, if they're looking at, as you said, to just screen, you know, the publications that people are putting to say, you know, what proportion are published in predatory journals, and then make that message back. In the end, it speaks to protecting your reputation, protecting your name as both a scientist and as an institution. And yeah, so anyways, that's excellent.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. There are a few comments people have put in the chat box. Those of you who have additional questions, you might want to either type them out or just indicate that you have a question. In the meantime, I'll read one from Sunil. Will there be a key list of references for such particles available at the end of the talk, perhaps? I guess articles. These references seem important if authors discover that they've been duped into publishing in a predatory journal. What is the mechanism to republish in a legitimate journal, if any?
Okay, so the first question, I can make my slide deck available. I think in the vast majority of slides, there is a citation, or it's, you know, you can see, for example, it's in PLOS Medicine or whatever. So I can make my slide deck available, and you can get the references from there. I think, could you just remind me of the second part of the question, Andrew? My apologies.
Sure. If authors discover that they've been duped, this thing scrolled down, sorry. If authors discover they've been duped into publishing in a predatory journal, what is the mechanism to republish in a legitimate journal, if any?
Yes, there is a mechanism. First of all, you have to try to get your paper out of the journal, the predatory journal. Now that can be done, but you know, these are scrupulous human beings, and they typically charge a very large sum of money, in excess of $1,000, to have it extracted. The other option that we've used for people who consult with us is quite a strong letter from the institutional lawyer to cease and desist. And that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work. It takes quite a long period of time. If you can get the paper sort of out of the system, then you definitely can try to publish it in a legitimate journal, but you would have to indicate your mishap in the letter to the editor for submission. But if it's out there and indexed and picked up, you will not be able to put it into a so-called legitimate journal. I think yesterday, and I recognize that many people wouldn't be there, but I think there's a policy in place to really get rid of a lot of these problems. And there is something called preprint. And a preprint is a completed manuscript that is submitted to a repository prior to submission to any journal or in conjunction with submission to any journal. So I think that if an institution makes the policy that any piece of research coming out of the institution needs to be put in a preprint, of course, at some level it matters if it ends up in a predatory journal, but at another level it doesn't, because you can always cite the preprint. The vast majority of preprints include DOIs. So you have a unique identifier. The CIHR, NIH, they all welcome the use of preprints, and there is policy to that effect. So I think one way to get rid of publication bias, reporting biases, submission to predatory journals, mandate that everybody has to put something on a preprint. Our center, which is obviously just a small little center, we have a policy. Every single thing has to be put on a preprint. In our case, we put everything on the open science framework.
Excellent. Thank you.
Free of charge. Preprints are completely free of charge.
Yes. Excellent. Okay, well, thank you for that. Thank you for the question. Goyo asks, thank you for your talk. I have a question, if possible. Have predatory journals infiltrated databases like Web of Science or Scopus? Would limiting submission to journal citation reports be a safe way of avoiding predatory journals?
Well, the answer to the question is that predatory journals have leaked into trusted sources. They've leaked into PubMed Central, they've leaked into Scope, they've leaked into everything. And I didn't provide all of the citations today, but I can give you Andrea Manca, M-A-N-C-A, who's a very good researcher from Italy. He's done a lot of this work, and we've been lucky to work together. So there are many examples of articles published in predatory journals leaking into trusted sources, and that's a real problem. I mean, politically, what I can share with you is that we had many stakeholders at our consensus meeting about defining predatory journals, and I went out of my way to invite somebody from the National Library of Medicine. I wanted to get them involved, and they refused to come. And one of the reasons they may have refused to come is that in 2017, we had a paper in CMAJ where we indicated that we thought that the National Library of Medicine had to review and perhaps modify their criteria for getting journals onto PubMed. And it wasn't meant as it was meant as a constructive discussion, but it clearly wasn't received that way. And I think we need to sit around the table to sort of figure out how can we ensure that these papers are not continuing to leak into trusted sources. And by the way, it's not just for you and I as researchers. It's probably for a far more important group, if I could say, patients. Patients use this. And one great example is, I mentioned a paper by my colleague, Manoj Laloo. Manoj has published his mother-in-law. I'm not sharing anything out of, he's published this and we've discussed it. His mother-in-law was dying of cancer. And, she read something in a predatory journal and, said, oh, I have to take this. And this is the intervention. It shows it works, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a lot of work for him and his wife to really counter that problem for his mother. So, patients are using what comes into PubMed Central, et cetera, for decision-making purposes.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, Dr. Moore. Sandra Ofori has an interesting question. Would you advise young researchers who unknowingly publish their work in predatory journals to remove those publications from their CVs when applying for faculty position?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would not advise that, because it's possible that where they're going may have identified it through searching of Scopus, Google Scholar, Dimensions, just depends. What I would suggest, what I would recommend is that you have a little place in your CV where you indicate that you unfortunately had published in a predatory journal. And I think you could provide a brief explanation. I think transparency will be always the most important thing, because you don't know whether somebody will have identified it or not. So I think that you should have a separate place for that. I do think it's essential that, again, on a broader mandate or policy initiatives for new staff, new faculty, new graduate students, that, if I was king of the world, I would have a course at universities on research integrity. And part of that course would be a lecture on predatory publications. And it, I think, yes, we should focus on, early career researchers, people coming into the system, because they've most to lose in a way. But I do want to really emphasize the point that, we have a consultancy service that we operate at our institution. And I can't tell you how many senior people have come to sort of say, oh, I published in a predatory journal. I've done this and I've done that, or other, nothing to do with predatory journals. Quite unfortunate behavior that has resulted in something very problematic. And so I think that if we can continually, train people, I think that would be important. I don't know what goes on at McMaster or at your institute. At my institution, I have to do a WMIS training once a year. I don't even know what a lab looks like. I couldn't tell you one end of a lab to another, but I'm required. Now, I don't have to do it. And if I don't do it, what happens? My email is shut off. So why wouldn't we have something like research integrity? Isn't that important? Why wouldn't we have that as part of a mandate for ensuring that people know about predatory journals and know about a lot of other issues? Authorship order. There's a lot of other problems that we come across, and I think that would be very helpful.
Excellent. And Paul O'Byrne had a question. Paul?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Moore. An excellent presentation, very thoughtful. I have some responsibilities here at McMaster for policies and procedures and so forth. And I'm wondering, at your institution, where obviously you have a huge amount of expertise as a result of your interest in this, whether policies have been put in place to deal with the issue of not so much whether people are being duped into publishing in predatory journals, but rather who choose to do it because it's an easier way of getting their CV padded and increased, and clearly, in its own way, it's an example of academic malfeasance, at least in my view.
Yes.
And I'm wondering whether your university has taken steps to deal with that.
I can say that the university has not as of yet, but what I can say is that certain faculties have. So I'm not going to name them because I don't think that's particularly relevant, but we are asked routinely to randomly review CVs that are being sent up for promotion and tenure at certain faculties. And we provide a report, and the report indicates, person A has 6 articles in their CV as part of their promotion and tenure. And then the faculty at least know that, and the promotion and tenures committee know that, and then they can make the decision. We're not there to provide help in decision making. We're simply there to provide the evidence, the information. And we're asked to do that, not at the university level yet, but we have definitely been asked, and are continually being asked to do that at the faculty level and at the divisional level.
Great. Another question from Sunil. Your citations would be very helpful. Thank you. Great talk, very illuminating. So that's great. And as you mentioned, Dr. Moher, the slides will be posted at PHRI for people to use internally. So we can certainly do that. That would help with these citations.
Yeah, I'll send them down. I'll send them to you, Andrew. Or is there a better person you want me to send them to?
No, you could send them to me. That's
okay. I'll make sure I do that within 24 hours.
Thank you so much.
May I ask a quick question, Andrew, if you don't mind?
Yes,
Yeah.
Sonia, yes.
Hello, David, it's Sonia Anand here.
Hi.
I recall a number of years ago, you and I were on a editorial board for the new journal that Anita Palapew had started up. And we had discussed that some prestigious institutions such as Stanford, for example, were only going to consider publications in open access journals to kind of stop the fight of faculty trying to get to the holy grail of the New England Journal, the Lancet, etc. Did that take place? Have there been any changes where leading institutions have tried to change the way that researchers are fighting for publications, which in a way may, stop the market for predatory journals?
So I don't know if I'll try to answer your question, and just stop me if I'm not getting to the point. What I can say is that there's a very, very strong global movement to move away from journal impact factor. And the real push behind that is DORA, which is a declaration of research assessment. And among the many things they say, the most important is do not use journal impact factor to assess researchers for promotion, for hiring, promotion, and tenure. And there's a lot of evidence behind all of that. What I can tell you is that about 2,000 institutions around the world have signed DORA. 27 of those institutions are in Canada. I'm not aware that McMaster is one of those as of yet. But one thing you could do as individuals is sign DORA. The second thing you could do is you could have a committee. For example, at the Montreal Neurological Institute, they have a grassroots committee about open science. And you could have such a committee at McMaster, or you could ask your faculty or your university to look at DORA, to think about signing DORA. 2 weeks ago, the University of Calgary is the latest Canadian institution to sign DORA, and that was done. University Health Network has signed DORA, and many other prestigious groups have signed DORA. So I think that that's the first thing, because if you take journal impact factor away of trying to get into the New England Journal, et cetera, So I think that that's a very important first step that can be done at an individual level and at a faculty level and at a university level. The second thing is, I think that universities, from our research, which I haven't presented today, universities are not very transparent about the criteria they use for hiring, promotion, or tenure. And so what we do know is, unfortunately, that, publish or perish. Get out as many papers as you want. We also know, for example, the journal impact factor, and we need to do a lot more training and education. The journal impact factor tells us nothing about quality. It tells us nothing about the quality of the paper, the quality of the researcher. And there are numerous problems with the journal impact factor. We could start using, as I talked about yesterday, some issues around open science. And maybe those are of greater societal benefit. So for example, could your institute have a policy whereby data sharing is required? It's coming down. The federal government, the Canadian federal government, just released the tri-agency policy on data management last week. Within 2 years, not only will you have to have a data management plan, a DMP, but you will have to share all your data and share the code, etc. That's going on. There are institutions around the world that are actually giving you points for promotion and tenure if you share your data. And I mentioned today that one simple way I believe that would resolve problems of predatory publications, resolve problems of publication bias and reporting biases is require the use of preprints, that everybody who's got used preprints, why couldn't that be used as part of the credit system? The University of Glasgow explicitly state that being an editor-in-chief or doing peer review will count as points towards hiring, promotion, and tenure.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that's helpful. I'm not sure that it helps you, but that's
So thank you. It's good to hear about DORA. I wasn't familiar with that.
And if I can help, point you to anywhere else in DORA, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Dr. Moore. Okay, so let's see. We have a lot of questions. I'm not sure we could fit them all in, but one is from Fei Yuan. Thank you for a nice talk. What is the purpose of the preprint? Can I submit a manuscript to both preprint and a journal? If not, how long shall the manuscript stay as a preprint before it is submitted to a journal?
Yes. So there are different ways. So let me just go back and sort of say a preprint is a manuscript, a completed manuscript that's signed off by all of the authors on the team. And you can submit that in two fundamental ways. You can put it on a preprint server prior to submitting it to a journal, or you can do it in conjunction with. So for example, if you submit a manuscript to PLOS Medicine, they have their own preprint server and they'll ask you, do you want it dumped into the preprint server? And it's the same for the Lancet, a whole bunch of journals. What you should do is there's something called Sherpa Romeo, and you just have to look it up. And if you can't find it, just let me know and I can send you the URL. Sherpa Romeo provides policies of all of the journals on a whole variety of issues, including the review of preprints. So it'll say, yes, we allow preprints. It'll say, no, we don't. The vast majority of journals allow preprints. Some of them say, you can independently put it on any preprint server you want. There are about 34 preprint servers. And yesterday, I'm embarrassed to say, I forget the name of the lady I sent it to last night, but I sent a paper that we recently published that goes into quite a lot of detail about preprint servers. So if you're thinking about a journal, you simply go to Sherpa Romeo, see what their policy is about preprints, and take it from there.
Excellent. And
sorry to interject, Andrew, just want to say that during COVID-19, there's been an exponential increase in submissions to preprint servers. And you might be wondering, are there preprint servers for particular topics? There are. There's Psych Archive, there's Med Archive, there's Bio Archive. There's tons of places to, we typically put our research in Med Archive, Bio Archive, or Meta Archive. But there's lots of places to put your research regardless of its content.
Great. Heather A asks, aside from reputation risk for institutions and researchers, what are the risks, negative consequences for the general public, if any? Few people outside academia even read legitimate journals. How many people will access predatory journals? Is the leakage damaging to society?
Yes, it is. And I hope that I've provided an example of a real life example of Manoj Lalu's mother. And, we have a very strong patient group involved in our center and broadly involved at the Research Institute. People read what's in journals to make healthcare decisions. And they are not, in quotes, educated enough to know, is this a good journal or not a good journal? That's why we're working on the authenticator tool, to really try to educate people, researchers and patients and other stakeholders, about, does this journal have the criteria that look authentic? So when we go on the web and we search for information, we don't really know. But certainly as a patient, we may not know at all whether the journal is legitimate or not. And just as well as I have identified this morning, that lots of funded research is published in Predatory Journal, and it might well be legitimate research. There's tons of research that is not legitimate that is published in Predatory Journals because they don't appear to do peer review, and they don't appear to have any stance on quality metrics, ensuring that, we saw that, as I mentioned in one of the slides, that of the randomized trials, only 40% of them reported ethics approval. Well, that is hugely problematic. So yes, it can influence. It can have detrimental influence. And as I indicated, that these predatory article randomized trials are getting into Cochrane reviews. We know that Cochrane reviews are used, to make clinical practice guidelines. In another group that I co-lead, we do all the systematic reviews for the Canadian preventative healthcare, all the screening. So what if we had predatory journals in there and predatory articles, we didn't know about it, and that can have a profound influence on family doctors.
Indeed. And Tafadwa, I hope I pronounced that right. Hi, great talk for us young researchers. Countries like South Africa's Department of Higher Education and Training, for example, all universities have the list on their library, like the University of Cape Town website. Question, would having an annual list of acceptable journals to publish in to maintain government funding be useful? How effective is that versus planned online tools to estimate the legitimacy of a journal, or should we do both?
I think it's a really good question, and I don't know what the answer is, and I mean it quite seriously. Maybe we need some sort of randomized trial or some sort of study to examine whether one approach is a better approach than the other for decreasing these problems. What I do know is that in India, they have tried to develop a list and maintain a list, and it's very, very time consuming and very, very problematic to have the resources in which to develop and maintain a list. So in India, they do have a list. I don't know whether they still maintain a list. And I'm embarrassed to tell you, I forget the name of the group, but I could again send that to you. We were lucky in that the executive director of that group he has participated in quite a bit of work that we do around predatory journals.
Great. And I think we have time for one more question. This one is from Heather. Did media coverage for Elizabeth Holmes, Theranos founder and scammer, getting published in a predatory journal to prove the science behind her firm make a difference in awareness in academia and general public about predatory publishing? Is the media doing enough to cover the issue in general?
Well, I think probably the media is doing enough. I think, you know, we're busy researchers and we forget very quickly. I mean, leaving Elizabeth Holmes aside, we've had far more, I don't know how many of you are aware with the Derek Stapel case in the Netherlands. Derek Stapel was a very interesting psychologist. He happened to be dean. And a few years ago, one of his graduate students whistleblowed on him. Almost his entire career was made up of fake data. And how many people know about Derek Stapel? The Netherlands had a national committee to deal with this. So, you know, these things, they happen so often. There are so many of them that we forget quickly or we're not aware of them. But I think the best way moving forward is a combination of policy, education, and hopefully that will have an effect.
Great, excellent. Well, we are out of time. So those of you who still have questions, there are many, we couldn't get to all of them. Please feel free to perhaps email Dr. Moher, and I'm sure he'll be happy to get back to you. So thank you very much again, Dr. Moher. It's been a pleasure and really delighted to have you. And thank you so much for sharing that superb talk and all your insights with us. So
okay, take care and have a great day. I enjoyed it. Love the questions.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.